or good evening and good night, wherever you are in the world. It looks like we are live, and unless Twitch is lying to me. How is everybody doing? As usual, we're going to start out with our typical call out of let me know if you can see all this, let me know if you can hear us, if you're having any audio issues, all that kind of fun stuff. Give it a few seconds while I introduce myself. Looks fine, I do. Cool, awesome, thank you. All right, I'm going to have the chat up in front of me so I can follow people's questions. As always, questions do come in fast. I do have slow mode on, but sometimes they come in really fast, so I might miss them. Please don't spam your question. It's okay if you ask it a couple different times, but, you know, just leave it at 2, and don't write in all caps, because, you know, that visually is not appealing. So yes, good morning and Happy New Year. It is January the 13th of 2021. And it's exciting to be here, to be back on the stream, first stream of the year. And for those of you who don't know me, I am Nitocris, the community manager for Neverwinter, and I'm joined today by... Who are you?
I'm a lead systems designer. You know me on the forums as No Worries. I'm also trying out an even bigger headset with a different mic today to see if that works better for everybody. So let me know how it sounds.
And yes, we are here today to talk about Combat Reworks. It is the 4th Combat Rework stream since we began. We did 3 of them in December, took a little break to be on break, and we wanted to circle back with everybody and give you folks a chance to kind of ask questions where you're at, let us know your thoughts. I'm assuming there'll be some repeat questions. We'll try to tackle as many questions that come through. But I'm going to start off by asking Jared some stuff because I'm giving myself that privilege since I am host. And yes, there is some echo, but I call it the return of, you know, deity Jared, where he's speaking to us from above. And so yes, it is the 4th stream, and we've done a lot of different builds, iterations. Been in contact with folks in the forums. So I wanted to ask Jared if he felt that this had been a valuable process.
Yeah, so I think it was good in a lot of ways. It gave obviously all the players time to get used to it and give a lot of feedback, and we've adjusted many things over the weeks. We've adjusted powers, we've adjusted stats, difficulty, all kinds of things based on that feedback. Players had been asking a lot to be involved earlier in the process for these types of big changes, and this was our first time trying that out. And so that did mean it was rougher when it first got onto preview. There was a lot of bugs, a lot of issues, but that did also allow everyone to be in on it at a much earlier stage and have their feedback more likely to be able to impact bigger changes. So I think it was pretty good, and it was good working with the players in that way. And there was a lot of people that had a lot of great suggestions and dove into a lot of data and a lot of info. And so yeah, I think it was great, and as long as players also felt the same way, I'm sure we'll do it for some other big features going forward as well.
Cool. Yeah, I know that one thing that Chris has mentioned, and we had a couple other folks mention, is that this was kind of a live version of a CDP. Last year we began the CDPs, and there was a lot of written back and forth. It got hit by a lot of stalls, and some players felt that they couldn't see the effects of their feedback as quickly as they would like, just because of how game development works. So but also using something it's like a live CDP, I think has been really helpful, and at least to me, seeing that conversations go back and forth. So I hope to see more of this as well. We do have some questions coming in. I already saw some comments about excitement about Sharandar and the new module, and we are also really excited. I had been looking forward to announcing it for a long time. We might take some questions if they're related to the Combat Rework about Sharandar, but for the most part, that's a separate topic that we will have other streams on that as well. But we got, of course, one of the first questions from Harper as well as Arzith. Can it go live already? And question of the hour, has there been a determined date for the Combat Rework to come to live? So Jared, do you want to comment about new builds coming out or scheduling?
So we do have a build that I believe is supposed to go to preview tomorrow. I say supposed to because things can always happen. And that is the first build that we feel could potentially be live worthy. And so we are very close. And if that build, as players look at it and try it out, feel it's pretty good, we could go live with that on PC at least pretty soon. So yes, there have been a lot of people asking if we could go live, that they're waiting for the changes to update their characters and they don't want to wait anymore. And this last build brings a whole bunch of additional changes. And so we think we're finally at that point where we can start considering that for live. So potentially very soon.
Cool. Sorry, I'm just trying to get more questions. Ooh, you guys asked a lot of stuff. All right, so we had a question. Will Barbarian encounter Bloodletter be raised in magnitude like the rest of the encounters?
It's tough to ever say that specifically on the fly, but you can certainly check it out today, tomorrow, and see where it's at.
Cool. Are there any updates on the change to Celestial Weapon Set bonus?
Yeah, I believe we have that change will be in the build that's going tomorrow. So what we changed on that was currently it has 30-second uptime once it triggers, and then there's a 30-second cooldown before you can build stacks and trigger again. We're trying out that the cooldown doesn't exist. So once you trigger it, you will continue to build stacks after triggering it, and so as long as you keep hitting 5 encounter and daily powers, you can essentially keep it rolling nonstop. So that's the change that people will see, and we'll see how that one.
Cool. A couple questions about consumables. So we had one question, which was the potions that used to give critical severity will still give the same percentage. Will they still give the same percentage value, or the stats are they going to change? And then the other one was, are we going to see balancing on consumables? They're really not balanced and does not fit into the current combat system.
There's a lot of thoughts of consumables for sure. For the critical severity, if there's ones that are giving a lot more than other comparable stats, for example, if there was one giving, say, 20% and most of the top ones for power were giving 10%, then we would adjust that. On the consumables themselves, yeah, the sorbet is very powerful in the new system. The interesting thing about consumables, though, is it's not like a permanent item where you have to be that much more concerned about the balance there in the moment and adjust it, because consumables can get used up over time. We could, for example, instead of changing those consumables now, we could let people use them up, but change which consumables come from events in the future. So consumables have a lot of other options for adjusting, whereas a piece of gear that's, once you have it, it's there forever and it doesn't get used up, has to more be adjusted in that moment on itself. So right now I'm not planning to, for example, bring down the sorbet before we go live. But for example, it may be that it doesn't show up as an option next year so that they get used up and we bring new ones that are in considered a more balanced spot.
Cool. We have a question about solo bosses doing combat advantage damage when they are alone. How is that possible and why?
Well, those bosses are also generally very big, very powerful. A lot of our bosses are even 3-4 times the size of a player, and that by itself brings combat advantage. And then from a more, technical, not flavor aspect, if, a lot of our bosses are just single encounters, and so that if they didn't have that on by default, then that stat becomes useless, as it kind of is on live. A lot of people just ignore that stat. So it is a way to also make sure that the stats matter and they're useful. But I think with bosses, it's not that much of a stretch because they usually are, giant dragons or big giants or like Hallister floating up in the air, all seeing, all knowing. So, advantages flavor-wise come with that as well.
Sorry, just imagine Hallister, given the conversations this morning of disappearing staircases. So I've seen actually questions about companion bonuses on the forums and Reddit as well. So we do have another question here is, what about the companion bonuses for Zuna, Grung, Deathslot, since there is no weapon damage anymore?
I don't remember their specific bonuses off the top of my head, but things that were saying they did a certain amount of damage based on weapon damage, now that's just based on your damage. So everything that used to say weapon damage, assuming we caught all the the text should now just say damage because you still have a damage stat. It's still all the same thing underneath the hood. And then anything that is magnitude boost also works off that damage, and other percents that increase damage or increase your physical power still increase that damage. So they should all still function with the new damage. But I'd have to look at those specific bonuses to maybe clue in more there.
That actually kind of goes hand in hand with the next one, which is, do you plan to do more companion damage balance, or do you think it is in a good place right now? I think you kind of answered it already, but...
Well, that's a little bit different. I think we're always... So in balance in general, I think we're always going to be tackling balance. I think that never ends. I think, once combat changes go live and we start getting a lot of live data metrics, we're going to be, adjusting some classes that have fallen behind. We're going to be adjusting some powers. And the fighting companions damage, we know they're not all perfectly equal right now. They were made over, 5-6 years. So different times they were built in different ways. And so there are some that definitely don't compete with some of the other fighting companions and need boosts. And there might be some that still have broken powers. Like we found some that were doing AoE effects, but we're doing single target damage. So when something's an AoE, it usually has lower damage. And so we've been trying to find those and fix them. So since fighting companions weren't considered the best to use for a long time, I think there's a lot of those issues around. So we'll probably be fixing them up and finding them and balancing them as we go forward.
Cool. There was another question, which was, can we get behavior options for companions? As soon as I enter combat advantage with my companion breaks it. Mobs try like hell to maintain combat advantage on us. Why are companions constantly moving out of it?
Yeah, I definitely see the appeal of that. I personally would also like that. I've played, different games where you have a few commands you give your companions or hirelings, depending on the game. I think it's a decent size undertaking for our game, and our software people are doing a whole bunch of things right now. But it's definitely not a thing we could never look at, but I don't see that happening, for example, in the next couple months or anything like that. It would be a decent sized project for the way it's built initially.
Actually, this was a suggestion that I also saw in the forums. I believe it was Jan or Mickey who proposed it, and they posted about it. And I actually presented it during one of my weekly reports. So it's something that we have talked about. I presented it as well. But yeah, as Jared said, I think it's a little bit more involved than something simple. Let's see. Is this Combat Rework, going to close the gap between DPS classes and make them all playable and have the ability to push out similar damage?
So I don't think the rework itself does that. The rework is adjusting balance and mechanics in the game and adjusting stats in the game. To bring all the classes in line takes us balance passing and adjusting powers and feats. And that's why I was saying this definitely mixed everything up. And while we've gotten some info from preview and we've made some adjustments, and there's some more adjustments coming with the next build, it's tough on that small scale to have enough data to be sure about stuff. And so once it goes live, our metrics will start filling in. We'll see where all the different classes are lining up. And then we'll continue to do balance passes there. In the past, we did one of those where we did a big balance pass after getting a bunch of metrics, sometime after M16, maybe around M17. And that did bring a lot of them a lot closer in line. And so we can always put aside time to do those. And that is part of the plan, since this is a pretty big change that's going to shake up the balance, once it gets live and people start figuring out their builds and their strategies with the new system.
So that actually, there was a question that came in recently, which was, are the combat changes going to be a continual update, or will you move on to other projects after this goes live?
I think everything's a continual update. I certainly get where the question is from, so I don't think people would accept that simple sentence as an answer. There certainly have been times where we put out a feature and then we focus on a lot of other features, so we don't get back to it, that quickly. If you look at mounts, like how many years was mounts the same before we improved some of the functionality there? But this is, the core balance of the game. It's how the classes play. It's how the dungeons feel, which is what the bulk of our game is about. So we will definitely be continuing to do updates. Even, let's say we went live next week, we would still have, a chance to get patches out before M20 to adjust stuff. Then we could get more fixes in with M20. So even once this goes live, we should be able to get some changes and adjustments out. And once it does go live, we're certainly going to be watching for any initial significant bugs that weren't found, because there's so much content in the game. There's so many, combinations of stuff that things can show up. So we'll be paying close attention to that and making updates as we get the info.
Cool. And that actually, I mean, you pretty much addressed the question player had, which was, will the combat changes drop with mod 20, or do you think you have a good enough spot to release? And so I want to adjust that real quick for those of you who might have missed the announcement. February 9th is when new Sharandar, M20 is supposed to launch, with console coming a month later. And as Jared mentioned earlier in the stream, we do have a build that we feel is close to where we think it would be good to go live, that we're releasing it on preview tomorrow, or I believe that's the goal. As always, we'll make an announcement about it, and so players will have a chance, and we'll get feedback, and then kind of we'll reassess whether that build meets everybody's standards, if QA gives it its stamp of approval. But yeah, I believe the intent was still to get the combat rate changes out before M20.
Yeah, we want to. How much time between the two has varied, and of course it depends on when we get combat out and when we're solid with what we want to launch for M20. But the goal is to have at least a couple weeks in there, if not more, so that people have time to get on live, to play around with the new settings, update their characters how they want, shift stuff around before the new module. Like, we want to make sure that people have that window, so it's not all this new content drop, but you're also trying to figure out how you want to rebuild your character at the same time. So there will be at least a couple weeks separation there, I believe.
Yep. Let's see. Question. Did you rethink any feat changes in magnitudes yet, or is that off the table? Some classes rely on feats for the damage they do, and this could seriously hurt them, where you'll have clerics or rangers only in the game for DPS.
So I haven't adjusted any specific feats. There have been some powers for Wizard and some for Whisper Knife coming in the upcoming build, where we reduced some of their cooldowns, and one power got an increase in its effect. Haven't gone through every single class and tackled all different feats and stuff yet, and again, that's where there's a lot of changes we could do and we could guess at, but that increases the chance that we buff something up and then all of a sudden that's too much, and then we have to bring it back down, and that obviously, that kind of back and forth doesn't sit well with a lot of players. So I think we'll be, like I said, gathering a lot of the metric data, and then making some tweaks to try to bring things closer, and then checking the data again to try to bring them all, like we said back on the last balance pass, get all the DPS within 10% or so. And as a good first step, and hopefully we won't be that far off when it goes live, but we'll certainly be watching.
There was a question earlier, and then Ranger Reek kind of reiterated this. How does the percentage system work? Are we trying to hit 50% to reach full value, or are we trying to get close to 90% to reach full stats? And yeah, Ranger Reek kind of said, is the goal for the ratings, other contributions, to be at 90 or 50%? There's conflicting opinions on this topic.
I think there's some different terminology being mixed in there as well. So the ratings themselves can only convert to 50%. There isn't an expectation that all of your ratings are switching to 50%. That there's, potentially, depending on your build, 3 or 4 that you can get to that point. And then for the 90%, again, it's definitely not intended that you will get all of your stats across the board at 90%. You probably won't even get, for example, your DPS, all of your offense, but getting 3 to 4 at 90% is likely where some of the better builds will be. And so, no, it's not intended that you cap everything out. It's intended that there are some choices there. But to answer the other part of that question, 90% is the full effect, any one of the ratings, which is why they go up to 90%.
Let's see, questions. We had Nova ask, on the forums, the latest post of combat changes was changed to items, item set bonuses. What changes have you decided to do in that aspect that you can talk about?
So if you went out with the last build, I think there was some potential text typos in there which made that harder, but I think the actual changes were called out on the actual change notes. And then the big one I just talked about earlier coming up in this upcoming build is the Celestial set. And I don't don't think there's anything else significant coming in this next build. So Celestial Set was the one, and then, like I said, we had 3 or 4 or so on the last update. And then we did a pass for a bunch of the proc type powers to swap them over to percents. So I think most of those should be over in the percent range now.
Cool. We have a question about the Eladrin Companion that's coming in the Expedition Pack of Fairy Finds. Does it really have 50% damage reduction at Epic? I don't know if it's a question for you or Chantel, but...
I will have to look at it. I unfortunately suspect, because I did go in and, for example, look at the lockbox, the first lockbox for M20, and look at that stuff. And because this work was going on, as that work was going on, there's some things that weren't on the proper new scales. So I would have to take a look at the Eladrin and then get back to people, but probably do that this week. 50% does sound high, but it depends on what else it's doing. So
I did also want to address, there was a rank miscommunication that went out for the new Expedition Pack. I'll be updating information, like I'll be updating on the blog. I just heard about that miscommunication this morning, so I haven't had time. Literally had a meeting at 10, and then I had to shift to prepare for the stream. But it will be quickly updated on my side of the communication, and I believe in game as well. And that will go along with the. We're also working on updating the tooltip for the claimability of the mount, the wings, the butterfly wings, which will be account wide. It's missing the account tag, the tooltip. Let's see, other questions real quick. As many things are going mythic, are we considering making insignias go mythic too?
I certainly would expect them to go to mythic at some point. They're not going mythic with M20. There's no plans for them to go mythic in the next few months, but we got mounts up to mythic, we brought companions up to mythic, so yeah, I would certainly expect insignias to go up to mythic at some point in the not super distant future, potentially sometime this year.
Cool. Questions about exchanges. I knew I'd seen one. How long will the exchanges be available? And have we kind of finalized what all will be able to be exchanged as we figure out new balances?
So everything that's on preview right now is what is expected to go live. So the exchanges as far as what can be exchanged for the combat work is pretty much set. The bonding exchange will most likely just stay up forever because bondings no longer have any actual functionality. So anyone that comes back to the game in the future and has a bonding, we want them to be able to swap it over. Same with the companion P tomes and all the different options there. And then for the other exchanges, they'll be up for, a couple weeks or 2 or 3 weeks. Not sure if we have the exact timing on that yet, but those will be limited time because those are exchanging items that still have functionality. And so the goal there isn't to just create an exchange where you just keep changing around what your enchantments do over time, but to give people a chance to swap over since there are changes to set themselves up for what they feel might be a better setup now.
Cool. And I'll as soon as I get more info on schedule for how long exchange will be around, I will post it. I promise you all that I will hound Terramac and Jared for answers on that one. And give people a heads up when the time is running out, stuff like that. Let's see. I did see questions about giveaways. No giveaways planned for today. I did giveaways I think in the last Combat Rework, but I've been trying to avoid those during these Q&As just because we do get a lot of questions, and the chat starts getting kind of spammed with everybody trying to participate in the giveaway. So it makes it a bit more cumbersome to manage it. But as I mentioned, you will have more streams with me because we have new module to talk about. So we'll definitely have giveaways during those. So stay tuned for more of those, but not today. Another question from Prism. Are you able to confirm what is meant by other contributions, as sometimes I change enchants and it goes to my rating rather than other contributions? It isn't explained very well in the character sheet.
So most of the non-weapon armor enchants, actually I think all the non-weapon armor enchants, are supposed to be direct rating contributions. But the easiest way to determine the two when there isn't a bug is if it's a bigger number like 1,000 or 1,200 or something like that, then it's going to the ratings. If it says something like increases power 5%, then that's going directly to the percents of the other contributions. So things that say they're giving a percent should be going to the other, and things that say they're just giving a bigger whole number should be going directly to the rating.
Cool. Is there going to be another pass on weapon enchantments? Currently, Bilethorn and Lightning are significantly better for either single target AoE than any other options.
Not with this update. So this is one of the things that gets complicated, where players oftentimes say don't change too much of the game at once. And so we do a change like this, which was to change over the base combat and how the ratings function to make scaling work better, to give people better information on their character sheet. But then that opens the doors to, well, weapon enchants have been imbalanced, where there's only a couple that people want to use. Can you tackle that too? Can you tackle this other thing? Can you tackle all these things? And so we didn't specifically go into the weapon enchants and say we're trying to make them balanced. We tried to swap them over to using the percents and to make sense in the new system, but we didn't actually balance them to one another at this time. I do think we should tackle that in the future. We should probably tackle a few different things on enchants to make them more interesting in the future, but that isn't with this combat, and that isn't with M20. I also saw someone say, are they going to go up in ranks at some point? Yeah, it's been an awful long time since we've gone up in ranks. And so I would also expect at some point in the future, again, not M20, not with these changes, but at some point there'll be some higher ranks too.
Cool. Another question from Nova: will there be an exalt system like M12 for old weapons if players see a set bonus they like, but the item level is too low, or will that be the trade-off value?
Currently, that's certainly the trade-off value, and a way that we can introduce new equipment that people will be interested in, because we can bring back around a particular set bonus or equip bonus that they like on a new piece that's higher item level and higher stats. There's been obviously a lot of talk from players of doing something like that, and some interesting ways we could approach it. For example, using a system such as you need to get the newest item, but then so it still has value, but then you can use that as a component to upgrade an older one. Like, that's an interesting thing some players have talked about. So I wouldn't say that that's something we wouldn't consider and look at in the future, and we've talked about it ourselves on options to do with set and equip bonuses. But that would be by itself probably a pretty decent sized system if we wanted to make it include everything. Like, if we didn't just want to say we've made this new system for this one item, but we wanted to make it a system game wide. So that would probably be a pretty decent sized feature by itself, and so it would be done separate of things like this.
We have some questions about Sharandar, but I'm going to ask one more from some more pure combat rating stuff, and then I'll kind of go over some of the Sharandar questions. Let's see. Will Divinity regeneration still be tied to Forte? Because since there are no ways to boost it, the higher the item level, the lower Divinity regeneration will be. Same with a few other things.
So yes, it will still be tied to Forte. It's not completely correct that there's no ways to boost Forte. There's an enchant that gives Forte. There's boons that give Forte. I think there's also a secondary weapon effect that increases Forte. But one of the things you see when we introduce a new stat like this, or when we make some stats that previously weren't as valuable to players more valuable, people start saying, hey, there's not as many sources, there's not as many amounts. I think one of the things people were saying was there's not good mount options for pure accuracy, for example. And so what that really says is it gives us options going forward to make more interesting items. So if people want some items that specifically focus on Forte, then we can make some items that have Forte. Same thing with, now that awareness is obviously a more desirable stat, we can start making more items around that. And so it's not so much making sure all that stuff is there and everyone can max out their Forte the moment this goes live, but that the game has more options for itemization and builds and all that stuff going forward that we can tap into to make sure that there's always interesting options.
Sorry, I'm just reading a comment about a voice modular that you're using. Yeah, we already made the Divinity joke. So questions about Sharandar and how it affects especially strongholds. So one of the questions was, will they be able to be exchange kind of old Sharandar stuff for new stuff? Any info on what the fate treasures will be in guild strongholds with a new currency? So basically, I think a lot of the, whenever we're making any changes, we kind of have to see where everything spiders out. So how can guilds adapt? Will they need to, like if they're in the middle of building something and the change goes live, what happens?
Yeah, there's times like that where I want to make a joke that they're doomed forever, just because occasionally that's how people first approach the info. So I think you'll see it with the next build, is that the Stronghold will now take one of the currencies from the new campaigns, the new Sharnar campaigns, in place of the old currencies. We also have an exchange for the old Sharnar currencies, and there's two options. One is for some AD, the other is to turn it into one of the new campaign currencies. So you can either take those, turn them into the currency to get a head start in that new campaign store, or to swap it to something to donate directly to the Stronghold if you don't do that ahead of time before the changes. So there are, all those things are being accounted for. You should still be able to progress in your guild. You should still be able to exchange your currencies so you're not just stuck with them. And so, anything that we do end up, of course, someone points out that we missed, then we'll make sure we address it before we go live. But all those things are covered, and I think they should show up in the next build.
Since many enchants took a hit with the new changes such as Vorpal, will there be an exchange vendor for weapon enchants or a comeback of the weapon enchant choice pack to the Zen store?
So on the first thing, will there be exchange for weapon enchants? We're not planning on it. That's one of those things where, again, there was always some imbalances. Yes, some people feel Vorpal went down a little bit depending on their builds. That was one that we adjusted a couple times specifically to try to address that. Turns out a lot of different people want a lot of different things for Vorpal, which makes that tricky. But one thing we have to be careful of is a new meta shows up, a stat becomes more valuable, something changes, so therefore people want to just immediately swap everything they have to that other stuff. Like the game's going to change, it's going to evolve, stats are going to change, classes are going to move up and down on their ranks, all those things are going to happen. So, that's part of the progress, that's part of the changing. And so when it's not a very major upset, like for example, power going from uncapped to cap was a pretty major upset, so we allowed exchanges for those enchants and runestones that give power that people invested heavily in. But for the weapon enchant, it still has an effect, it still boosts you, it still gives you advantages, so we're not planning on an exchange for those.
Since Mod 20 has a 1 month difference between PC and console release, should we expect the same for combat changes? I do believe the combat changes will be coming first to PC and then to console, or are we going to release them at the same time? I don't recall.
They're definitely spaced out, because for the first thing is that there's always a lead time on console. We have to go through a whole cert process with the consoles that our builds and update is ready to go live, whereas PC, we can, for example, go to preview with a build, people feel it's good to go to live, and then a handful of days later, just go live. So that's the flexibility of PC. So we'll be going to PC first. I'm not sure how much the delay. I'm not sure if it's a full month or if it's just like 2 weeks. I know we want to try to keep those delays as small as possible between the different platforms, but I'm not sure what we'll finally end up, because there's a lot of factors there.
Will Genie's gifts be usable for the newer campaign?
So Genie's gifts are never usable on the newest campaigns. We add older campaigns to them over time, and probably actually overdue for adding a couple campaigns to them, so we should probably do that sometime soon. But Genie's gifts have never been usable on the brand new campaign. They're always more of a way to catch up and accelerate some older ones.
So I'm seeing some questions about the dungeon, to unlock it and preview, and information on the dungeon. I believe that we are still, speaking of missing staircases, we're still working on some tweaks to make sure the dungeon was okay to go on to preview. We have had early access groups test it out, but we don't want to release it onto preview with certain like very obvious known issues. So we're still making some updates there. I mean, I'll always circle back with Lassor, the producer in charge of it, and ask for more details on when it's coming to preview. Then also saw some questions about roadmap. That is something that I have to sit down with Chris and then our lead producer Matt. Thanks, Julie. I'm already married, and polygamy is not legal in this country. So sorry. Plus, I like to get to know someone first before marrying. But yes, I need to sit down with those people who make the big decisions, Chris and Matt, to talk about when we want to talk about the roadmap. Though I did see that Chris mentioned they'll be talking about M22 later this year. So hopefully we'll have more information to share. When I know, I will then request that we share so that you know. How come Jared doesn't have a bunch of cool stuff in his background like Julia does?
This is just my life. This is how bare bones and simple it is. I've just never, Julie obviously does a lot of streams, given her role. I've never set up a space for that, so I don't have a good place to actually have a backdrop. So instead you see radiators. That's what you get.
You see my hoarding of stuff. That's what you see. Art. When I used to go to conventions. Sorry, I just wanted to throw in a very random question in there. Let's go back to other stuff before people start getting impatient.
Go ahead. So this person's asked this question a bunch, and I think technically, potentially spamming this question, but it is the type of question that gets asked a lot that's worth addressing. So it's the question essentially: are we going to keep doing these combat reworks, every year, every 2 years? No, the M16 was necessary because of the combat system had reached its limitations. The curves were maxed out, everything had hit its limits, and so we had two options there. One was just to move the curves, which means everyone gets nerfed down essentially at that point anyway, and then people work back up to those curves, and then we have to keep doing that cycle over and over again every couple of years. Or we could tackle rebuilding the system so that it could actually expand for a lot longer period of time. And that was the main work of M16. Obviously, there was some of that came out rough, and there was aspects that people have complained about, such as how the scaling was functioning, about seeing where their percents and their stats were compared to the content. And so this was basically a refinement of that to address those concerns players brought up, to finish flushing out that system a bit more, and assuming that it goes live and everything works well, and scaling is working well, players are happy that they're seeing their stats, then I wouldn't expect this kind of base combat rework for a very long time, if we even tackled it again. So it's not the type of thing where we're just doing it every couple of years just to mess with people or just to change as a hard way to change the meta, but it was originally necessary so that the game could go on for another 5-10 years, and now we're just kind of polishing that up a bit more.
So this is getting a little bit more granular, as it tends to get with people asking questions about specific classes. Will Divine Palisade on Justicar be fixed? It's currently covering 40% of your HP with your stamina, and when feeded, it's only 60%. Tooltip says it should do 50-75. Divine Champion is doing 50-75 as expected.
I think we adjusted all of those. I'd have to check to be in line with each other. I think all the tank classes should have a 40% and a 60% option at this point. So assuming that we got them all correctly, that should be where they're all at, potentially with this next update, so that all three tanks have the same option set.
Is there a reason that fighters got bonus awareness on their tab and paladins and sentinels got the bonus awareness on their dailies instead of just making all of them get bonus awareness on tabs?
So the tab powers are more unique across all classes, not even just tanks, but across all classes and their roles. And that had always been an advantage that, or I guess a particular aspect of that tab power that Guardian had. So we didn't necessarily want to just fully take that away. We did have to adjust it because it used to be, it would max out so we changed it to, but we didn't want to we don't want a situation where all the tanks just feel like they're clones of each other in different outfits, so they all have the same tabs, they all have the exact same power options, they all end up with the same options. So that's the big reason to not just unify all their tabs, is to make sure they retain their flavor and have advantages in other areas. And I think that's always the bigger challenge with balance, is retaining the class and role individuality, but still making them balanced while doing different things. So there may be some, again, some more balancing after we go live with it, but that's really the reason, is to make sure they all feel different.
Again, people who are tuning in late asking about scheduling. So I was going to reiterate that we have a build on preview coming out tomorrow that we feel is in a good place to be a potential release candidate. So we're going to be looking at player reactions on that build and feedback on that. And hopefully it's in a good place to release prior to M20. The Combat Rework will bring in with it the bonding runestone changes as well, and it'll be PC first. And then someone, Nixus I think, said that they missed Companion. I think the only thing we said about the Companion was that we had to, we're going to verify if it does have 50% damage reduction at Epic. So.
Yeah.
But nothing else. I did respond yesterday on Twitter that it is not account claimable like the mount, the wings are though. All right. Other questions. Let's see. Current big problem with Whisper Knife is their stealth recharge. Would you consider the stealth recharge to be the same as for Assassin's second feat overall and replace it for something that give rogues more damage?
I mean, that's pretty specific. I could say for sure right now. Whisper Knife is one of the ones that I just gave a couple of small boosts to. They're one of the ones we acknowledged need some boosts, so there's certainly potential there. I think they're pretty easy to say that for all classes there's some feats that people don't find interesting, and it'd be great to get some time to try to adjust those or rebuild them into something else. Obviously, rebuilding a feat into a totally new feat takes more time than, for example, adjusting the numbers on a power. So that would kind of be the holdup for that. But it's something I've been trying to look into and see about, is because there are players that for every single class out there are, here's 2, 3, 4 feats that we don't really like and we'd like to see change, and it'd be pretty cool if we could get to that at some point, but it's tough to ever promise something like that.
Nova asks, has a team looked into the idea of introducing new items or bonuses that increase your physical magical damage bonus? I feel like this could be really useful in the new combat system. Thoughts?
Yeah, someone asked that at the forums at one point, and again, I think that is an option for itemization going forward. I think, or even potentially player powers going forward. I think that's, for all the disruption going through change brings, I think one of the nice things about this change is it has opened up an awful lot of options for itemization that people would actually find interesting going forward, as opposed to it just needs power or straight damage increase, otherwise it's not interesting. So I'm sure the people working on rewards will start delving into all that kind of stuff, and we'll hopefully see some pretty interesting rewards coming in the upcoming modules.
Are the potions from Sharandar also being removed, or will there be other ways to get them?
I believe those will be going away at the time. I don't think we put them into the new Sharandar. Again, that's kind of the interesting thing about consumables, is we can make certain consumables. They could be potentially overpowered. They could potentially a best in slot. But then at some point in time, those consumable sources might go away and we'll evolve onto other consumables.
If players have them in their inventory, will they go away the morning it's released? Okay.
No, we didn't take away any items, just the sources of getting.
Okay, because I know sometimes the concern is that when some things go away, the item will stay in your inventory, but it's not usable and you can't delete it either. So I think that's probably some concern.
No, the only time we should do that, and hopefully it's the only time we're doing that, is when it's something to be exchanged. For example, the companion XP tomes switched to not being usable so that people wouldn't accidentally use them once the combat changes go live, because they have no effect. And so using them, you would just lose it. So that should be the only time that we actually switch an item to not usable. Because it should always have an exchange if we're doing something.
The Traveling Wizard says, can we please have equip bonuses that are more build defining than plus percentage X stat?
Yeah, I think this is one of the more challenging areas of item design. Is there's always a certain request for more unique items and things that drive certain build choices more. But then what we often see a lot of times is when we stray a bit and try to do something a bit different, new or unique. A lot of players say, that it's not valuable enough, and could we just switch it to a stat boost? And so it's one of those areas that we kind of wrestle with, where we certainly would like a lot more unique items that change builds, that change play style, that give people a lot more options. But the balance of that is always a lot trickier than just a stat. And then a lot of times if those don't work out, then we end up falling back and changing it to be a stat boost at that time, just so the items have some value to players.
So I know one of the concerns that I saw in the forums and just player chatter was with the bonding runestone exchange, and how it impacts AD. Uh, People are just worried about that. And then John the Scotsman says, their community has been brainstorming ideas on things to improve the game, like AD syncs. Well, to answer your question about where you can get them to the right person, if you're posting in the forums, they get passed on in my report. Um, but I was going to ask Jared, kind of when we sit down and make these changes that will introduce maybe more AD into the economy, how we also started thinking about additional AD syncs or other areas and players can use AD.
Yeah, and it's it's another one of those areas that's interesting. We've obviously had an AD economy problem for a very long time. I think since before I even joined the team, and it's certainly not gotten better over the years. We've been discussing some ideas, even independently of bondings. There's a couple of potential ideas that we might be trying out in the not too distant future to see how that goes. I wouldn't want to talk to them too much because we haven't confirmed we're doing it yet, and don't
Yeah,
want
and the
to
moment it leaves your
give
mouth,
people
people
info.
are like, it's
Yeah.
confirmed.
But on the other hand, at times where we try to give AD other purposes and things that people can get with it and that kind of stuff, then there's always a bit of friction of, why does this cost AD? Why do I have to spend AD on this? Because they don't want to spend their AD. They want to save it for whatever they feel is very important. So there's a bit of, back and forth there of we need more sources of AD syncs, but we also need to make sure some of those AD syncs are pretty special or pretty powerful items so that players feel, good about those syncs. But we do also just need in general some more syncs. And so, yeah, we realize the AD economy is a problem. Obviously, with the bondings, the biggest issue there and why we felt we needed to give AD is there's a lot of people who have, for example, all maxed out enchants. And so if all bonding was an exchange to other enchants, those people aren't really getting anything back because they don't need those enchants. And that's why we went with AD, to make sure people got as much of their value back as we could make sure that they got, so that they didn't feel, they invested in something and then just totally lost all that value.
A lot of questions popped up all of a sudden. So let's see. Question about collars. Their bonus for 3 out of 5 collars. It's just a negligible boost that doesn't boost damage but increases item level requirement. Will you consider giving collars the exact ratings as they have item level rather than force players to unequip useless collars to cap ratings? And I'm quoting verbatim what they say.
No, I talked about some of this math on the forums at one point. So one of the things did was raise the item level and then gave half of item level to combined rating on all collars. And one of the things that does is if a collar is giving, I don't remember the math off the top of my head, but if a collar is at 1,000, then that's giving you 10,000 health and 500 damage, and that works out to a few percent boost if you're at 50,000 item level to begin with. And then because item combined rating is covering half of that, you're losing like 1%, I think, or 0.5% on your ratings, losing 0.5% on your ratings. And so there's situations where, that health and that damage boost can more than make up for that. I think the places where players are going to do that more is where they're really trying to eke out every bit of min-maxing in scaled dungeons, so they don't get the use of the higher item level, and they really want just that extra little percent to do it faster. And In those cases, some players are going to unequip the items, but you also should be able to do those dungeons just fine without unequipping those items. So it's really down to how finely tuned, efficient you really want to be versus it's not that big of a change, so I'll just run that dungeon anyway. And so I think that's the only place where it's really an issue, but I don't think we're going to make them perfectly match just for that situation.
Cool. And there's a question here from St. Lucifer and Chris Snowcrash kind of already responded in chat, but I did want to bring it up. Will there be any more sources to get awareness since it's more important in Mod 20? And Chris said that he's been discussing that with you, Jared, already. So I don't know if you want to say more about that.
No, I don't have anything to add to that. But like I said, it's what I was alluding to earlier is because some stats have changed in their importance, and obviously we added stats like Forte. Not surprisingly, people's first goal is how can I max out that stat? And because they weren't a stat that existed before or weren't a stat that was important before, there aren't just a ton of sources of it for people to use, and that's where future itemization comes in play. That we start working that in, building that in more, so that people start building up all those options. But certainly understand people's drive to have all those sources right now, because for a lot of players, maxing out your character is the main ultimate goal. So they just want to do that as soon as they can.
Let's see, question. Mount bonuses such as quick actions were brought down to a point where they aren't viable. Do you plan on adjusting these bonuses?
I think there's some dispute over that particular analysis of it. But no, we're not planning to adjust the bonuses on those mount powers at this point.
And what do you think about changing mount bonuses to percentage stats instead of ratings? Companions give percentage bonuses. Mounts are similar kind of investment.
So I definitely again get why players want everything to be percentages. Percentages are the thing where once you have it, you have it. So the ratings go up over time, their caps go up over time, you keep needing more ratings. But capping out your direct percentages, once you do that, you're done. And for that exact reason is why we're trying to limit those sources. Those are, the type of bonuses that once you fill all those out, new items are going to be a challenge, because why would you want them if you have all of your other bonuses? So it was intentional that mounts work off of the ratings. We're not planning to change that with the initial launch, but again, anything we do now isn't this is how it has to be for the next year or 3 years or even 6 months. Like, there's always room to adjust things as we go forward, but right now those are going to stay as written.
Jan asks, since there is a new class incoming and now Zen companions and many mounts become account wide, are there plans to make more things account wide?
So I think that's tricky, because there's not a lot of stuff that makes the most sense to be account wide. For example, if you get a piece of gear, that doesn't make sense that for all the different types of classes you might have, that'd be account wide. There's certainly been some talk among the players and even us about potential for companions going forward, since we made the mounts account wide reclaims on the newer stuff. And we did change the Zen store ones to be account wide reclaims. So I could see that one potentially happening as one of the most obvious, but it gets a bit trickier with stuff beyond that, because now you're talking enchants, gear, all that kind of stuff that you're upgrading individually and they're for specific classes. So I think there's going to have to be a certain amount of stuff that is not account wide reclaimable, but we're also trying to make sure that most things aren't bind to character, that they're bound to account, so that you have the potential to use them across your account how you want to.
Cool. Let's see. One more question. Oh, coming in fast and awesome. A lot of people asking about Celestial again. And you mentioned that was going to be in tomorrow's update on preview, correct? Changes to Celestial?
Do you want me to say them again?
Sorry, what?
Do you want me to go over them again?
Yeah, sure. Why not? There's people coming in a little bit later and we only have a few minutes left. So yeah, go ahead. Go over, because it's been asked a lot. So go ahead.
So the change that you'll see tomorrow for Celestial is that the lockout timer is gone. So once you trigger it, it lasts for 30 seconds. Then within that 30 seconds, if you do 5 encounters, dailies, any combo thereof, again, it refreshes that timer and that continues on. So there's no longer the 30-second lockout timer after the effect ends. Now it's just if you can keep your momentum going, you can keep that effect up.
And then we do have we'll be looking at revamping old artifact sets. Some of them are really good.
Artifacts is interesting. It's kick off the whole thing with this, but I guess I'll start down this path. It's Artifacts is one of those systems that's been around for a long time, and there's been a lot of thoughts like that. Like there's old artifacts that people find some of the effects interesting. What would we do with that? Would we just make new versions of them? Would we allow them to be upgraded? And so Artifacts is one of the ones we've talked about of potentially finding some stuff we could do to that system as a whole to modernize it, to make it more interesting, to give it some more depth. But that currently isn't on the schedule to do. But it is one of those things we've been looking at and thinking about because artifacts are interesting. They do a lot of stuff that other slots of gear don't do. And there's potential for them to be even more interesting and have a lot more flexibility. So at some point we might dive into that system and do some of that interesting change.
And then question, has the team thought of introducing or modifying currently existing set bonuses to introduce more percentage bonuses like Heart of the Dragon, Valindra set, to give 10% recharge or 10% control bonus?
Yeah, I think the problem again was that we ran for a period of time where the way the system was set up, what people really wanted was either a power increase or a % damage increase. And so some of those types of bonuses that are, recharge rate or anything like that, people found less valuable. And I think we have the room now with the new system to start exploring that again, and that those have the potential to be things that people actually want to use. And so, yeah, I could certainly see us trying out some of those again.
Let's see. Well, this will be we'll call it the final question. But before I ask it, I do want to acknowledge that I missed the name, but someone did bring up the promissory note because it couldn't be a stream without someone bringing that up. So thank you. You've now made it an official stream. Appreciate it. No comment on the promissory note. Sorry. Question. Tier 3 items are getting reworked into percentage stats, but putting 12.5 crit plus 12.5 crit severity on a single armor item, the grip cage, isn't it way too much of a bonus?
Yeah, and it's interesting having that come from a player because it probably is too much of a bonus. But here's where we run into the design dilemma, right? So we're changing the combat system, therefore we're reworking some stuff. We're trying with that to bring stuff into a good balance, but not surprisingly, people don't typically like their items to be nerfed, as the term all the players like to use. We would tend to say rebalanced, but nerfed. And so where possible when making these big changes, we try to retain the values even if they're a bit too strong, so that the changes themselves can be looked at as opposed to being overshadowed by, but you nerf this, but you nerf that. And that's where that balance becomes really tricky for us. Like, which items do we nerf because they really are going to be too big of a bonus and they're going to be the only thing people focus on, and that slot's going to be locked into that item for potentially years. And when do we adjust that to solve that problem, but then have players unhappy that we nerfed an item? So that is one of the more challenging aspects in a live game. Doesn't mean we couldn't potentially adjust it down, but we were trying to retain the position of those items as much as we could, which is why it's where it's at.
Cool. All right, it is 11:59, so we're going to wrap it up. For those of you who missed the news, tomorrow we'll have a new preview build on combat changes that we feel is close to something that could go live. So we await your feedback eagerly, I'm sure. Jared does too. He spends a lot of time in the forums.
So make sure to check it out. And if people agree that it's, because a lot of people have been saying that they'd like to see us go live so they can be working on their characters and just be fully involved in new changes. And we'd like to have that happen too. So let us know what you think when that build is out.
Yep, we will announce it on social media when it's live with patch notes. Thank you everybody for stopping by. Thank you for the great questions. And again, Happy New Year. And take care, everybody.